on air right about now. So I'm going to introduce first myself because this is going to go on our English channel, sort of. So I'm Nicola, part of Aesthetic by Science, and today this is, I think, our second international speaker after Menno Henselmans, and this is someone who I think is super underappreciated and hopefully will become more famous, at least in Bulgaria. This is Cliff Wilson, in my opinion, one of the top coaches in the US. I've been a huge fan following Cliff for a really long time. And I wanted to do this interview. I mentioned that to Cliff because sort of been getting my information from this one stream of knowledge with the evidence-based guys like Menno. Obviously, I followed his course, Ari Helms, whatever. But also, Cliff is evidence-based. I really like all of his work, and he has a different point of view. And to me, that is super valuable because there's always something that we can learn from each other. And actually, we have really awesome topics to discuss today. But first, Cliff, can you please introduce yourself to our audience, share a bit about your experience, where you started from, and you mentioned a really cool story just about now that you know, your start was really humble, but you wanted to just practice bodybuilding, and that was everything more or less that you thought about at that point.
Yeah, well, first off, I appreciate you having me on here. This is, this is my first time being on the show, and I'm looking forward to it. And kind of like you said, my full-time job is coaching bodybuilders. I'm pretty much living the dream right now. And yeah, you mentioned I got my start. I did my first show in 2008, and so coming up on 10 years now, and it was I just was kind of testing it out. And I've never been a very big guy, muscular guy myself. And so I kind of approached things differently, especially back in 2008. There wasn't a lot of scientific application being involved at that time. And so, but I was kind of taking it upon myself to use that with my own process. And very shortly after my first show, I wasn't really looking to become a coach or anything like that, but I had a couple of local people approached me because they wanted to do their first show. I didn't know how effective I'd be for them, but I knew that I probably knew more than they did. And so we kind of I started getting them ready for their shows. I was not doing anything through email or social media. I was literally just writing their plans onto a piece of paper at the gym and handing it off to them once a week. And it was good. There were only two of them, and they both did really well. They actually both won their shows. And then when they won, I started getting more people approaching me. And it kind of just became a snowball effect. As each person did well, it led to more people and led to more people. And kind of like you said, like nowadays, everyone is really like, they try to build their name through social media. I was so far behind the times even then because it was, 2009, 2010, and Facebook was still pretty popular at that point, like really popular. And, even in the early point, my wife has been constantly pushing me to be more modern because she had to make me start doing this through email. She's like, this is ridiculous. You could send these guys emails rather than writing with a pen and paper. So I got email. And then, even around like 2011, she was like, all right, you need to get a Facebook page. You're so far behind with everything. And I remember distinctly, I said, no, I don't need Facebook. Why would I ever need a Facebook page? And she's like, well, I just think it would be good. And so fine, I broke down and got a Facebook page. So I'm constantly trying to keep up with the new things. I tend to just bury my head in the bodybuilding sand at times.
Thank God for your Facebook page, man. You've been treating us with this really, really incredibly shredded guys. But it's been really awesome for the whole experience from finding someone that is not well known, at least for me, and being like, oh my God, this guy's so good. Why haven't I heard of him? And then as I mentioned with the really ripped guys, I haven't seen guys like that. Really rare to see that with the rapid backload protocol. But let's try away from this and go into the more general public realm, because most of our followers are not hardcore bodybuilders. I mean, we do have some guys that follow us that are natural bodybuilders or aspire to be ones, but I think this is also going to be useful to them. And we've been known here in Bulgaria for bashing supplements more or less,
Yeah.
especially some like BCAAs. And I actually know that you recommend BCAAs, and there's been a front recently with within the evidence-based community showing that okay, if you eat enough protein, then BCAAs are not, they don't have any added benefit. And either way, you can actually drink a protein shake and you have more BCAAs than a single dose. But you do some funky stuff with BCAAs, intro workout with some carbs. And I actually want to start a conversation on supplements with BCAAs, but then we can probably talk about other supplements. You recently posted on Instagram, Facebook that you're the type of guy to drink basically everything almost and find an application for everything.
Yeah.
So that's that contrasts our opinions so much. I think it would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, and I guess I should start off by saying I do consider myself, somebody that knows the scientific research. It's always been at the forefront of what I do. But I really kind of consider myself that middle ground. Those that don't know, I've actually co-own one of the biggest scientific bodybuilding conferences in the country. It's called the Physique Summit, and we bring together researchers and coaches and different people within the scientific and bodybuilding community to come together and speak and give presentations. So I should say, while I do use a scientific approach, I never want to ignore what I see in real life. And a lot of times I will go about something first with a completely proven scientific approach, but if I see something happening in real life, I'm not going to ignore it. And luckily, as a coach, I've coached hundreds of athletes over the years. I get to see trends that are more than just on myself. I get to see trends over time. And so when it comes to branched chain amino acids, I can't deny or argue with what the research says, that if you are consuming an adequate level of protein, then I guess I would even say adequate level of protein would be debatable in my mind, but that's a whole other story. But I'm not necessarily a big fan of people. You see guys with their gallon of water with their branched chain amino acids in it, and they're just sipping it all day. That's not necessarily the way I like to use it, because I do think you're just better off having a meal and having regularly timed meals rather than sipping the branched chain amino acids throughout the day. But the time when I do think branched chain amino acids are useful is during the training session, because first off, I used to, back in the day, because I do think it's a good idea to have some amino acids coming in during training. I mean, what's that saying go? There's nothing more anabolic than calories. And I do think that it is a good thing to have some amino acids coming in during training that can be there, so the body doesn't need to pluck from muscle tissue should it need some. And so now, with that said, I'm not a big fan of, a lot of people will drink a protein shake. I've even heard of people drinking a protein shake right before their workout or during their workout. But I used to do that, but I'm not really a big fan of that, just because you will get blood flow being shunted away from the sympathetic nervous system for muscles and being shunted towards the parasympathetic nervous system for digestion. So, then you start getting to the issue of, are you hurting your performance a little bit? Whereas free-form branched chain amino acids require no digestion. So that will be really easy. You won't be shunting blood flow. Same thing with simple carbohydrates. So you can take those together. You won't be sending any extra blood flow to deal with all this protein coming in that needs to be digested. So a lot of times when it comes to meal timing, I'll maybe have people eat a meal 3 hours out, so they're not heavily digesting, maybe 2.5 hours out, so they're not heavily digesting this big meal they just ate. And then branched chain amino acids during the workout in this space here, and then a protein intake afterwards. So that way you're kind of bridging the gap. So if you're working out for a considerable amount of time, you're going to go 3 hours before your training session, 2.5, 3 hours before your training session, maybe another 1.5 to 2 hours during. So you're looking at 5 hours there. So I would like to get something in there, and usually branched chain amino acids work as a nice bridge to that. Now, I will say, for beginners, do I think branched chain amino acids are terribly important? Probably not. And are they going to be the type of thing that are going to change your life? No. It's one of those little things that adds up over the course of time. And if you're in this for the long haul, if you're planning on training for 10 years or so, it could be that thing that adds up to a little bit over time that will lead to something substantial.
And do you prefer any specific breakdown of proteins like 811, 411, like any specific ratio, or would any do? And what dosage would you recommend? 5, 10 grams?
Personally, for my clients, I'll usually recommend around a total of 12 grams for men and about 8 grams for women. And so, based on body size, it generalized there. But, I've always gone for the 2-to-1 ratio. Now, there is some evidence that shows that, the branched chain amino acids can antagonize each other a little bit. So, some people have said, oh, maybe a higher ratio of leucine would be better than a 2-to-1. But then you also get into the issue that if leucine is too high, it actually starts to deplete the plasma levels of the other two branched chain amino acids. So generally, I think anywhere from a 2-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1 is probably going to be a good bet. I'm going to go out and just be honest and say, I think the research is still emerging on what the best ratio may be. But traditionally, a lot of research has shown 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 to be good, because if you start getting, like you said, to the 8-to-1 ratio, then you can get into the problem of you're starting to deplete the other plasma levels of the other two amino acids.
Because they share the same transporter in the blood, more or less.
Yes, yeah.
And some evidence has suggested that actually adding other essential amino acids, so apart from the branched chain amino acids, can actually stimulate the larger muscle protein synthesis response. Have you experimented with something like adding some EAAs to the BCAAs, or do you keep it just simple?
Yeah. No, and I when it comes to supplements with my clients, because I'm not a big fan of coaches giving their clients a supplement list and saying you have to buy all these, because like you said, supplements are such a small part of the picture. But I am that guy that says I will take every small piece, every small advantage I can get, no matter how small it may be. But I give my clients a supplement list that is a scale. So what is more important all the way down to less important. And I kind of just tell them, you buy what your budget can afford. That way they're not breaking the bank trying to get all these things that, in the end are only going to be a small piece of it. But I do like to take some branched chain amino acids, and then I take an additional essential amino acid supplement. Now, these will be in a much smaller dose. So like a lot of times I'll see essential amino acid products, and they're not probably as high in the branched chain amino acids that I would like to see. But like you said, I do like seeing the whole spectrum of essential amino acids. So generally I take like two. I'll take a branched chain amino acid product with a lower dose of an essential amino acid product, and I take them together during my training session.
Okay, cool. And this list you mentioned, obviously it's gonna vary from person to person, depending on gender, depending on what their goals are, age, stuff like that. But can you walk us through what, in your opinion, are the essentials for, let's say, intermediate to advanced male lifter? Because that's most of our audience here.
Okay, I'm going to start off with where a lot of people start off, but I think people need to listen to this. I'm going to start off with a protein powder, like a whey protein powder, or even like a time release protein powder. Now, when I say that, I think a lot of beginner lifters think like, oh, I can't make progress without a protein powder. Yes, you can. You need to view this like food, but the reason I think that even though protein powder, I'm going to say protein powder is equal to chicken or eggs or whatever, any protein source, it's the same thing. But the reason I think it's good to have is because convenience. It is so convenient, and I would say that even the most advanced lifters get into those situations where they're like, I don't want to cook again, or you're out of the house and you're not going to have time to cook or bring a meal with you. We all get in those situations, and I think protein powder works as an amazing insurance policy for the time when you're too lazy to cook, or you're too busy to cook, or you can't bring a meal with you. It is really easy to put a scoop or two of protein powder into a shaker cup, throw it in your car, and find a water fountain when you need it, shake it up while you're out. You know what I mean? So I think it's one of those things that it's not like you need to use it every day, but I think having it in the house is a good thing because it prevents you. And then what's the first thing people do when they don't have time to cook or they don't feel like it? They usually go out and get something that is way off of their plan. That's where people get themselves into trouble. So I think it's a good way to keep yourself out of trouble. And then you get into a lot of the basics. Creatine monohydrate, a very proven supplement over the years, super cheap, very effective. A lot of times I get people coming to me and they're like, I haven't been taking creatine. They're taking all these supplements and then they tell me they're not taking creatine monohydrate. I'm like, why? I'm like, this is like the most proven supplement and it's super cheap. It's a creatine monohydrate product is not going to break the bank. And full disclosure, for everyone looking, I am sponsored by a supplement company called First Form. But I've been using these supplements long before I was ever sponsored by First Form. But I mean, even like a creatine monohydrate from First Form is like $12 and you get like, I want to say like 90 servings. So, it's not something that you're going to break the bank trying to take. And then when you get into, because I deal with a lot of dieting bodybuilders, very restricted caloric intakes. I do think even something like a multivitamin is good now because, when you're in your off season, if you're eating a good variety of vegetables and fruits and a wide variety of foods, it's likely you're getting everything you need. But when you're dieting and calories are very restricted, sometimes nutrients might be a little spotty. When you get down to 1,800 calories or so, it can be a little hard to make sure you're getting everything you need and enjoying your food, I guess I would say. So sometimes I don't tell people to look for like, the really high dose vitamins, but, just get a multivitamin that will cover all your bases a little bit. Now, then I get down to a lot of others. Now, once again, my supplement list, I go pretty long into it, like even some things like natural test boosters. But I mean, the basics are, protein powder, creatine, multivitamin, things like that. Those are going to be the ones. And I do like pre-workout supplements. I really like them actually, because I think that intensity levels will rise and fall naturally. And sometimes it's kind of like an insurance policy to having a good workout. Stimulants can be an effective tool. I think it's important that people don't abuse them, because people very much do abuse pre-workout supplements. They use them too much. They use too much of it. Then they'll have 3 energy drinks and then take their pre-workout. Now with stimulants, I think stimulants are a tool that I think should really kind of be cycled. You have periods where you can go a little bit higher and then you need to follow it with periods that are a little bit lower. But I do think pre-workout supplements are a great tool to have, because sometimes you maybe just had a long day or something like that, and you can use it to really get things going. So yeah, hopefully I didn't give you too long a list there, but
no, these are more or less the staples. I mean, most of our listeners, most of the people that are watching would probably agree with this. And you certainly give us a really nice tip and something to experiment with in the light of BCAAs, because I haven't regarded them in that sense, but I'm definitely going to try it out with some simple sugars added.
I guess I'll say one more thing when it comes to supplements. Now, I don't know as much the landscape in Bulgaria, but when it was, now I don't even think you guys don't even have First Form in Bulgaria. It's just in the US. No. And but I'll even say this, just be careful with what supplement companies you go with as well. I'm sure for the beginners, they probably don't know this as much, but the longer I've been in the industry, the more, I guess I would say, jaded I've become about the actual companies itself. I was recently,
Sorry, my internet connection went off for a bit, but now I'm with you. Yeah.
What was the last thing you heard me say?
basically the last sentence you started saying when you said that you've become a bit jaded and that
Oh,
recently something you had an experience.
yeah, you know, so I would say when it comes to buying supplements, if it seems too cheap to be true, it probably is for a reason. You know, so just be careful because, you know, a lot of the lab tests, when a lot of these products get tested, a lot of times there's not as much protein as they say is on the label. There's a lot more carbs than they say that's on the label. Sometimes there's just nothing, you know, there's none of the active ingredients that are in there. Some pre-workouts have stimulants in there that are illegal or banned. So just be careful with what you're taking. You know, make sure, I would say, go with reputable companies because, you know, especially I was in a spot earlier this year where I had I was I was getting offers from other supplement companies, and so I wanted to do my research about what company I wanted to go with and, you know, wanted to trust. And especially like as I was like kind of just digging around, you know, and looking into a lot of things, it's like you just can't trust all of the companies. And so I would just make sure that, you know, if it seems too cheap to be true or too good to be true, I would say you might want to be a little wary of it because it's probably the supplement, at least here in the US, the supplement industry is not terribly well regulated. And so a lot of times I would say look for companies that have some sort of third-party testing on their products to make sure that you're actually getting what you're paying for. You'd be better off using fewer supplements, but getting ones that make sure you're getting what you're paying for rather than using a ton of supplements that may not even have any of what they say is on the label.
Or even worse, just have heavy metals in the formula, because that's probably way worse. And we had a case here recently. Have you heard of the US company, supplement company called Haya Labs?
Sounds familiar.
I don't know, man, because it was promoted heavily here as a US company from, I think, California, whatever. And you know, the founder was supposedly a guy named Joseph Haya, and he was a biomed expert in the US. And then it turned out it's a Bulgarian company that sells. Actually, it turned out it's not they're actually putting what they say on the label, but it was shady because they just took a picture of a high school teacher here from Bulgaria. They said, okay, this is Joseph Haya, and they make this Haya Labs thing. So it was really funny, man. But
In the U.S., there was a company recently, actually somewhat local to my area of the U.S., that I remember everyone was talking. They're like, their protein powder tastes so good. It's unbelievable. It tastes so good. So somebody took it to the lab and tested it. And it said on the label, it had, 25 grams of protein, only 2 carbohydrates. And when they tested it, it only had like 5 grams of protein, but like 30 grams of sugar. It was like 30 grams of sugar. And so pretty much people were just like, no protein, just carb up. And I was just like, so once again, I would say go with a company that has some sort of third-party testing or third-party inspection, because, man, I mean, that company was around for years, and it took years before people finally caught on to what they were doing. And so, yeah, I would say it can be dangerous out there if especially as a beginner, because I've been around this industry for a while. I know a lot of people in the industry, so I was able to kind of ask the questions and to the right people behind the scenes about which companies were trustworthy and which ones weren't. I could only imagine somebody that's a beginner, they don't know what to follow. They just see what they see online and what they see in a magazine or something like that, and they just assume it's all going to be the same. So it's kind of scary out there when you think about that.
yeah, Ben. But let's talk a bit more on training, nutrition, because that's the meat. I mean, that's Pareto principle, 80-20. Like, this is what gets you the results. So I'm really curious to hear how you structure nutrition for your competitors, because basically what we've been doing the last, let's say, year and a half is not not cycling carbs per se, but cycling calories overall. So on the training days, we basically jack up the calories way high and center everything in the post-workout window. Basically, have just small meals, regular normal-sized meals before the workouts, and then have a big dinner, big breakfast if you train in the evening. And then in the rest days, we sorry, we lowered the calories way down, more or less trying to do a protein sparing modified fast sort of thing. And it actually works really good, but we've also, been around long enough to know that it's not the only way. And we've been experimenting with even higher calories in rest days, and it certainly has advantages and disadvantages. But it's curious to hear your opinion on the topic.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I'll say, well, first off, I'm going to start off by saying I never do the same thing for everyone. I set it up different for almost all my clients because the thing that I love about coaching is the individuality. What feels good and what, while we're all humans and we're all subject to the same physiological processes, genetics can really dictate what works well for one person and what doesn't. And you even mentioned, okay, so I have noticed, if we're talking about non-training days and what to do with caloric intake, one thing I've really found is that a lower caloric intake on non-training days seems to feel better and be more suited towards people that I would say are struggle to lose weight. Those people, the people that they have slower metabolic rates. We all know the hard fat loss cases. They're generally also the ones that are pretty muscular as well. I think we'd all agree the ones that are usually pretty muscular are also the same ones that have a harder time losing fat. And so their bodies are just built to store energy. And, I noticed they can go on a lower caloric intake on their off days, and then the next day they're going to feel totally fine. Now, I'm going to say then on the other end of the spectrum, I fall into this category. Those with really fast metabolic rates, those with fast metabolisms, high energy people in general, I find they tend to do a little bit better with higher caloric intakes on their off days. And I can only speculate. Actually, I talked about the Physique Summit that I co-host. Last year, we had Dr. Mike T. Nelson speak. And for those that don't know, he's a brilliant guy, and he does a lot of out-of-the-box things with his training and with his nutrition. And he does a lot of work with heart rate variability. And he's really big on, kind of like I said, about making sure that people shift back to more parasympathetic nervous system dominant after their training to get back to rest and digest. For those that don't know, the parasympathetic nervous system is more focused around rest and digest. And so, I think that it has a lot to do with high energy, high active people. I know that when I'm on my off day and I'm not getting enough food, I start to, I almost have a hard time relaxing. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but for those that have ever done a diet, there's almost a certain fidgetiness that comes with dieting. You can't calm down at times. And so I find that higher food intakes for higher energy people almost helps their body just relax a little bit. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when I have a higher caloric intake on my off days, I find that my training days in the days to come are significantly better. My training sessions in the days to come are significantly better than if I put those calories on the actual training days, which makes no sense because you'd think the higher caloric intake on the training days would lead to better training sessions. But I feel under recovered because it's almost like I didn't fully take advantage of those rest days that I had. So just an interesting thing what you said about playing around with the different days. So if you tend to be somebody that loses fat pretty easily, loses weight pretty easily, I would say the naturally skinny types, like myself, you're probably going to do a little bit better with the higher caloric intake on the off days. And if you're, not the skinny type, struggle to lose fat, you're probably going to do a little bit better with more of your food on your training days, like you had mentioned.
Yeah, it's also more or less depends on the person, like you said, the individual component of psychology, because some people can actually feel really satiated eating less on the non-training day. It's really weird. If you give them more calories, they tend to overeat more, even though it makes absolutely no sense. So it can be so wild that we can stretch scenarios from here to tomorrow. But Um, I'm actually curious also to hear about what are your, I don't want to say this, but like what is your guideline of protein intake, and do you prefer more high carb diets or more high fat diets?
I am, once again, I'm all over the place with that. Um, I will say my general goal coming in uh, is to give people as many carbohydrates as I can, but for some people that is just not a lot. Um, Now, I guess I'll start with protein intake, and I've talked about this on some other interviews I've done. But my protein intakes generally tend to be higher than what most people um, recommend. It's always kind of funny because I would say when I first came in and I was really new to the sport and new to coaching, I would say I was very, if there wasn't research behind it, I wasn't going to do it. And and so I started off with that, and I always kind of laugh because uh, I say I've almost started off extremely evidence-based, research-based, and I've almost gone more to the bro side as I've gone the other way. Most people go the other way, so I started off with, I would say, more lower to moderate intakes, in my opinion, based on what the research says. But I've gone higher over the years. First, I started doing it just because I noticed that people that would come and apply to work with me high protein intakes, and I'm not saying high protein intakes for 4 months, but they would be on high protein intakes for years, 5-6 years plus. Um, they were always, and I mean, there's almost no exceptions to this rule, always the biggest people I would have coming apply to work with me. Now, correlation isn't always causation, but you can't completely ignore the correlation. And so I was like, maybe there's something a little to this. And so my reasoning, I kind of was thinking about why that could be. And there, of course, excess protein can be converted to glucose for energy. So I started thinking about ways to structure it, and I would actually structure it. I structure it accordingly based on contest prep and off season, which is a whole other story. But so I started experimenting with higher protein intakes, even on myself. And I, over the course of a year or so, I did notice the difference. And it's funny because I've been training 14 years, and I started that probably 4 years ago. And oddly enough, my progress in the last 4 years has been some of the best progress I've ever made in my career, which is odd to say after a full decade of training. But so I do go with higher protein intakes. In times where I'm trying to get people to grow, it's not uncommon for me to go, 1.3 grams to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, assuming they're a lean individual. Now, if in prep I have to lower that, if I have to go down to even a gram per pound or less, just to get somebody lean, I'll do it. We got to get them lean no matter what. But then, fat intake. Fat intake is also a tricky one. So carbs and fats, those are going to be your energy sources essentially. And so I would say usually they're going to work at some sort of inverse relation. If you're going to have fats a little bit higher, then carbohydrates need to be a little bit lower. If you're going to have fats lower, carbs will be a little bit higher. I've actually noticed there's a certain racial component to it. Now, this always makes people really uncomfortable, but a lot of darker skinned individuals, a lot of my black clients, it's not uncommon. Research has clearly shown that insulin resistance runs heavily among black people, and so diabetes is higher among black community, and so they tend to not feel as good. They don't perform as well on a very high carbohydrate diet. So a lot of times I'll go with a higher fat intake and more moderate to low carbohydrate intake for my black competitors. They feel better, they perform better, they lose weight easier. And it's kind of funny. I will say one thing I've always noticed is that when you look around the industry, a lot of the best black coaches have great looking black clients, and then the white clients look terrible. And then the best white coaches usually have great looking white clients and their black clients look terrible. And I've always kind of found that funny because it just shows they only know how to do what has worked for them, you know? And I actually had a rude awakening with that right off the start of my career. My first two people I worked with, those two guys I mentioned from my gym, they're both black. And when I first started coaching them, I tried coaching them like what I knew, what was working for me, which was lower fat intake, higher carbohydrate intake. It was a disaster. For the first couple months, it just wasn't working. They weren't responding like I responded. And even a couple months into it, I kind of just told them, I was like, all right, guys, I was like, we need to try something different here because this isn't working. And luckily they bared with me. And so I think it was good education for me that the first two people I coached were totally not like me. And it kind of immediately at the start of my career made it click that different people are going to respond very differently. And so, you know, that's how I would say over the course of my career, I've really noticed this component of, you know, genetic backgrounds are going to dictate to a significant degree what someone performs best on, what they feel best on, and you know, what's going to lead to the best results. So I would generally say that, you know, if you're a pretty pale white guy, more than likely you're going to see a little bit better results from a higher carbohydrate intake. If you're black, you're probably going to see a little bit better results on higher fat, lower carbohydrate intake, just due to insulin sensitivity issues.
It's more or less the same with the gender difference between males and females as well, because as far as I know, and some of the latest research has shown that, you know, females tend to do better on a high-fat diet, although that's not always the case, because I personally have some female clients that do really well on a quite high-carb diet, but these are really strong chicks, they're really lean, for, you know, they're doing pull-ups with more weight than some of the guys in the gym,
They're the
and
exception.
yeah, they're the exception, yeah. But in general, I think females also do better with more fat.
Yeah, and even lower caloric intakes. I would generally say that a lot of my black competitors need lower calories to lose weight. Same thing with women. I have a lot of black female clients, and you know, sometimes when I have some people complaining to me about how little food they're getting on their prep, I'm like, you've never seen a low caloric intake until you've seen what a black female competitor has to diet on. I mean, they get their caloric intakes. I mean, every single black female competitor that I've worked with has to go to extremes that most people wouldn't even imagine just to get show condition. Just because, you know, their genetics, being female, being black, means that they're probably going to need low caloric intakes. Now, it's a whole other story, but I have a good friend of mine, Ryan Doris, that I also work with. Smart guy, and he's the same way. Very muscular guy, but he needs very little food to get lean. And you know, I have even kind of theorized that it makes perfect sense. You know, a lot of my black competitors, they're very muscular. But they have a hard time getting lean. And you know, even especially the ones that come from backgrounds where their ancestors came from more poverty-stricken areas, you know, where there wasn't a lot of food. You know, there wasn't a lot of nutrition. So it makes sense that the genetic lines over the course of years, the genetics that allow for someone to build muscle and keep weight on very little food will survive. You know, having a fast metabolism in an area where there's not a lot of food is not a good thing. You know, and so it just makes sense that over the course of years and years and years and generations, you're just going to develop the genetics predisposing you to build muscle on very low caloric intakes and have a hard time losing weight.
By the way, Ryan Doris is one of my absolute favorite athletes, and I think because I used to train with Jeff Alberts a long time ago, so I was in the 3DMJ group, and he's around. I mean, he's well known there as well. And there was this post who motivated you to, you know, to compete in natural bodybuilding. Although I haven't competed yet myself, but I did a few photo shoots, and I said Ryan Doris, and I'm doing powerlifting, and I'm following him as a powerlifting as well. So he's a really
He's
nice
great.
guy. props and shout out to the entire De Novo team and to Ryan.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Ryan, I've known Ryan since like my earliest days of competing. I think even like one of the first shows I ever brought athletes to, Ryan was there, and you know, we just got to know each other over the years. And I'm happy to say, actually, I just started coaching him on the nutrition aspect about 5 months ago or so. And so, you know, it's great. We've been good friends for a long time, and he is, like you said, he's a great bodybuilder, super intelligent guy. And so, yeah, all around good guy. If you don't follow Ryan Doris, I think everyone needs to find him.
Yeah, his philosophy vlogs are a bit dense, but I think if you
Yeah.
if you want to, if you feel a bit lost and demotivated, that would certainly help you out. And yeah, speaking of the beast Ryan is, let's talk a bit more about training, because we're, I think, running out of time a bit as well.
Yeah.
So what's your approach? I'm just gonna throw it out like that. I'm not gonna ask you about anything else and try to narrow it down. Just what's your approach? What do you love the most? And that's it basically.
Yeah, you know, when it comes to training, once again, I'm a very middle of the road guy. I think some people are too intuitive with their training. You know, they go in with almost no plan. They don't listen to anything that science tells us about training. And that's not good, obviously. I think failing to have any sort of plan is going to set you up for failure, and you're not checking any sort of data about how much you lift. That's a problem. But on the other hand, and I used to be this guy, I think too much planning and not allowing for flexibility of some of the variables can also be a detriment. And I'll say this. So I was that guy that I was very into setting, and I would do this for my clients even early on in my career. You know, we'd set the microcycles, we'd set the macrocycles, we'd plan the deloads. You'd go into the gym and you'd know what your RPE was for every single lift, every single set. And not a bad thing. In fact, for early on in your training career, I think that's a great thing, because I don't think you're as equipped to read what your body's telling you. But I think as you become more advanced, you need to start to learn to be flexible with that. And one example I always use is, if I walk into the gym for the day and my plan only calls for an RPE 7 or something like that, but I feel great today, I am going for it. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm going to feel great on the day when I'm supposed to go for it. So I'm going for it today. You know what I mean? So I think having the ability to be flexible within a constructed system, like I like to, for myself and for my clients, I really like to adjust rep ranges, because I do think there's value in hitting a wide spectrum of rep ranges. I like to build in some sort of mechanism for progressive overload. The goal is to get stronger and add more weight to the bar. And I even like to, from time to time, vary the type of reps we do. Now, the type of reps, it could mean rep tempo, but I would say some reps built more upon explosive movements and some built more upon providing tension to the muscle. You know, the old squeeze it and feel it type thing. I don't want to, but, you know, while that sounds a little iffy in terms of scientific, but the goal is to provide tension to the muscle tissue. Sometimes I think people lift so ballistically that they're not actually providing tension to the muscle that they're trying to stimulate. So I provide these constructs of, you know, reps, overload, and how it will be set up, and frequency. You know, I don't like to see, usually I don't like to see a muscle group only being trained once per week. Generally, I like 2 to 3 times per week. But in terms of intensity of the lift, I like to give a lot of my clients the ability and freedom to make those calls in the moment. Because I think we've all had those lifts where you get there and you think you're not going to have a great workout, and you get into it and you're like, oh, actually, I'm really strong today. Or you get there and you think you might have a great workout, but you're just not very strong that day. And so I like to, I really like people to auto-regulate how much they're going to be pushing it. And even for deloads, I am, this is also probably controversial, but I'm not a big fan of really planned out deloads. You know, I know a lot of people are in favor of, you know, deload every 5th week or so, maybe every 6th week. But I've had some times where, you know, right before a set deload, I start hitting a nice stride for whatever reason. Maybe I'm sleeping more than ever. I'm having a situation where I have less work on my plate than normal. And I've been able to rattle off 4 or 5 good weeks beyond what my deload was, where I can just keep progressing on certain lifts. And so I don't like the idea of I'm on a nice roll, but I'm going to deload because my plan calls for it. And so I a lot of times I like to view feedback, talk to my clients, and I'll say, you know, how are you feeling? You ask them questions. How are you feeling? You feel like you might need a deload? And even if they don't always know when they need a deload, for me, asking them those questions, they start to become aware of the feedback, the biofeedback their body's giving. You know, do they feel like they can keep progressing? Do they feel like it's time for that deload? And then in which case we can insert deloads when needed. But I do think that becomes a more advanced thing that people pick up along the way. Somebody who's only been training a year probably has no clue when it's time to deload. So I would say the more advanced you get, the more flexibility you should probably insert into your plan to allow you to make calls in the moment.
Until very recently, probably, I would critique myself as being too rigid with what I did, because we're really big on the training frequency, like basically the high frequency bodybuilding, powerlifting style workouts, similar to the Norwegian study, to the Norwegian team. So it's not doing the same exercise, let's say, or hitting a muscle directly 5-6 times a week, but even indirect. I mean, if it's not your whatever arm day and you do heavy pull-ups or chin-ups, obviously your biceps are going to get worked. So we really and for that reason, fatigue management has been a bit easier in the sense that you don't even need to plan deloads ever. You just deload a lift when it starts getting really bad. So sometimes you can go months on training 6 days a week without deloading. But recently, very recently, we started experiencing, experimenting with a bit more planned deloads, using just different techniques. Not pushing it every single workout and using like an auto regulation scheme for deloading. And it's actually, even for us, I would say we're a bit more advanced, me and my colleague Stan. It is good from time to time to just plan some deloads, just to be aware, because if you don't experience these deloads, you can't be aware that you need one. It's like practicing the RP. When you're a beginner, you don't know when you're going to fail, how heavy RP9 feels. You're not going to spot it on any exercise.
Yeah, and you nailed it. I think it's just one of those things you learn over time. You know, you start to learn how your body feels when it's time. And I guess I would also say for a lot of people out there, you need to have some sort of system in place to keep you moving forward, but then also have some sort of system in place to allow for that level of recovery. Like I'll just use myself, for example. I'm doing a plan right now where I have a three-day block of training where I will focus on overload and low rep ranges. And then I assert in the middle what I call like more auto regulation days. Like on these days, I'm definitely going for it. And then these days, depending on how I feel, I can either back off slightly or I can keep pushing it. And then I do another 3-day block where I try to progressively overload in high rep ranges. So these days, I'm definitely going for it. And then I do another 3-day block where, depending on how I feel, I can either keep going or I can just back off a little bit. And so I'm alternating those cycles. And so, I think it's good to work in what I just kind of call them flex days, flexible days, where you can push the intensity of those days based on how you're feeling. But like you said, it's. I think in the beginning, a lot of people feel like, oh, if I back off even for a day or two, I'm gonna ruin everything, or I won't make all the progress. But they don't realize the benefit that it has to just taking a little bit of a back off day. And it doesn't even need to be like a 50% intensity back off. Sometimes even just going to 80% of what you normally do will be just fine. You can even, I would even dare say, if you maybe focus on, like I said, providing tension through squeezing or with a little bit of higher weight. Sometimes even my back off days, I felt like I've gotten more out of it because me lightening up the weight and focusing on creating a little more tension provided a new stimulus for the muscle group anyway.
Yeah, lift lightly, but lift like you mean it. I'm pretty sure if someone measures somehow, it's probably impossible to measure lifting intent. You would see that people that not move weights but actually lift them will get better results.
No, actually, you know what? One of my buddies, Christopher Barakat. If you're not following him, he's a good young up and coming coach, and he wrote a great article on intent. And he cited some study in there that was really interesting, where they had people lift with intent to actually. They wanted them to actually intend to engage this muscle more actively than a second group, and they actually they provided a greater contraction and stimulated the muscle to a greater degree through lifting with intent. So that was a great word there too that you used, is that I think a lot of people fail to realize that the effect that you can have by trying to just even mentally engage a specific area and really putting effort into engaging it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work about the mind-muscle connection. Like at one point it was really big. Then, the scientific crowd said, "Oh, okay, this is not really true." And then now we're finding out that sometimes it can work, just not for every exercise. And for example, I think there was this research that even touching your muscles while working them can provide, this perception. You're more aware, and then you're working them out more. So I've been actually experimenting with this on some exercises. Just if I'm doing side lateral delts and I don't feel the movement, I just try to touch my my lateral delt and see if it's any better. And actually, I can say there's been probably a slight improvement, but I do feel the exercise a bit better. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to correlate to more hypertrophy, but it's still more enjoyable at the very least.
No, but I think you're actually right. And I've even noticed from muscle group to muscle group, and I get this from my clients, but I find that different rep ranges allow me to, feel it. I always hesitate saying, "Oh, you got to feel your muscle working," but it is true to a certain degree, because if you feel it working, you can be sure that there's tension being provided. And at the end of the day, increased tension on a muscle, on the muscle, will increase growth, because the body isn't, the muscle isn't counting how much weight is on the bar. The muscle only knows how much tension is being placed upon it. And so, it doesn't matter if I'm lifting 100 pounds, but I'm swinging it and I'm having other muscle groups help and take over the movement, that will provide less tension than if I drop it down to 70 pounds and I use strict form and I provide greater tension with that 70 pounds on the target muscle. So no, you absolutely nailed it. Sometimes you kind of get caught up, because I think we've all seen like some of these real like bro bodybuilders where the way they speak about like muscle confusion and stuff like that, it almost sounds like voodoo science, or voodoo magic they're talking about. They're like, oh, it's like this, like it. You almost think they're like going to like one of those holistic healers type thing. But it's like there's probably some degree of what they're saying that is probably true, and we got to figure out which ones are true and which ones just total nonsense and block it out.
Yeah, and as I said, I've been a bit rigid in my beliefs, but recently I've been trying to to appreciate the work that some people will do, even though they're not in the scientific field. They're working with a lot of athletes for a lot of years, and this is practical experience that sometimes it just takes a few trials and errors, and it takes time until the scientific part is sorted out as well. So definitely want to expand the range of speakers, not only scientific but also practitioners, because they have a lot of insightful tips like yourself. And it's been really interesting, the thing you said, that you were reading the science part of things, and then you kind of scaled back.
Yeah.
But I imagine that is only because you're a practitioner as well, and you can practice this with so many people. As you said, you're seeing trends, and it's stupid to ignore trends. If it works, it works sometimes. So you can't ignore those details.
No, and you nailed it. And I guess I had a hesitation to always, I guess I would say, do something that wasn't absolutely proven by research. But over the years, I would always try to, when I see something work in real life, I always try to at least say, why might this be working? Scientifically speaking, you know what I mean? Scientifically speaking, why might this be working? And then, if I can, deduce a good reasoning, then it allows me to at least experiment with it and see what works. And then the way I always use it is that everything that is now scientifically proven started off as an unproven idea. And so that's kind of one thing I always think about is, even for example, I remember when HIIT was really popular for cardio. And everyone was, oh, you shouldn't do steady state cardio. You've got to do HIIT. This was, I would say, in the past, 6-7 years or so. I would say about 4 years ago, I switched from HIIT. I didn't like HIIT. I started going all low intensity steady state. Now, there's various reasons for this. Now it's kind of coming out that HIIT may not be very, very good for dieting bodybuilders. And so, I caught a lot of hell for that when I was like, I don't like HIIT at all, because it was really popular at the time. And a lot of the research was showing that HIIT was the way to lose fat. And so, but the thing is, sometimes you got to step out on a limb to what you know to be true when you're looking at it. You see this working, and you might have some scientific reasoning behind it. And then you got to test it. Hopefully people get in the lab and test it and see if it works.
It's funny because HIIT is it's still a big thing here in Bulgaria, I would say. And even though we were, science-based, and we still are a bit rigid in our beliefs, we kind of like, okay, this is true. But every time I've done HIIT, or someone I know has done HIIT, or a client has done HIIT, after 10 sessions, 12 sessions, they actually get injured.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This is something that we said no more of this. I mean, it's too harsh.
Yeah, and then even my main, once again, more of a scientific reasoning behind it was primary fuel for HIIT is going to be glucose. So if you're dieting, glycogen and glucose is already in short supply. So you're robbing your fuel source that is being used for your weight training. So that's going to hinder your performance during your weight training. And then also, HIIT demands a lot of recovery compared to low intensity, steady state cardio. It takes no recovery to go for a walk. So not only are you robbing your fuel source from your training, but then you're demanding more recovery. So I'm like, from both ends, you're kind of hurting things a little bit here. So that's when I started getting away from it, because like you said, I think anybody that's been a dieting bodybuilder and then had to go knock out 2 or 3 HIIT sessions a week, maybe more, you're like, I can't do this. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm dying here.
No, it's too much. And you know what? I think you also have to appreciate, that these are just tools. I mean, you can use it if you don't have enough time. We've been using HIIT a lot, but for depletion workouts, before carb loading, for photo shoots. But I think that's the only scenario right now that we're using HIIT ever.
Yeah, and I won't say I never use it, but I would say that the people are probably best suited towards it are like powerful athletes. You know what I mean? Like, I have some clients that are they'll recover from anything. You know what I mean? They're those are the people I tend to find do really well with HIIT. People that struggle with recovery, naturally thinner people, they're usually going to get pretty crushed by it. But like you said, I think it can be used even I do use it in the off season, when, calories aren't, at a high, carbohydrates aren't at a high premium. So, there are situations that call for it, but I would say, when a dieting bodybuilder, that's not the time I'm going to be using. I guess I should state that.
Yeah. And I think that's all for time. I don't want to take any more of your time today, but it's been super interesting. I really hope to have you again in the future at some point. And if you can please share where can people find you, your Facebook page, your email. Of course, I'm going to list that below on the YouTube page. But can you please just elaborate if people want to get in touch with you, get coached by you, how can they find you?
Oh, sure. My Facebook page, people can just search my name, Cliff Wilson. I have a personal page and I have like an athlete page. You can follow either one of those. And then my Instagram is @CW Team Wilson. I share a lot. Like Instagram usually can kind of be pretty shallow with just a lot of like pictures. I try to put a lot of good information up on my Instagram as well. And then my website is teamwilsonbb.com, and you can get a hold of me through there. And there's information about coaching and a lot of client pictures and stuff like that. And yeah, those are pretty much the main places people can find me.
Yeah, really, really crazy shredded guys. If you just want to get some bodybuilding eye candy, you can just follow Cliff on the social media.
No, but
Thanks a lot for the
really,
interview.
I really appreciate you having me on. This has been great.
Thanks. It's been absolutely amazing, and I hope to see you again in the future. Have a great week ahead, and I guess I'll talk to you again in the future.